Order out of chaos. We've all heard this saying many times before as what is yet to come, but the truth is the controllers have used this for centuries, at least since the 18th century, in starting revolutions and overthrowing the old order. Most notably is the French Revolution and American Revolutions, which both took place right around the same times. And I think you're going to find out in this video that Freemasonry had a big part to play in that. Now, I hear a lot of people talk about the controllers, but I never hear anybody actually break it down, because in reality, what we have is basically a gang warfare with all the rest of us, caught in the crossfire of it. Instead of guns and knives, they use, currencies and resources in, the sweat equity of their slaves, aka the citizens, you and me. So we have, of course, the Freemasons, and you can see here in their Constitution's book that they claim it's the 5,723rd year of the organization. Now, they are referring, of course, back to King Solomon's temple. So Freemasonry very much seems to have Jewish roots, and we're going to examine here in a second if they really went back 5,000 years with this organization. But I think Freemasonry, and guys, I'm going to have to refer to them as the Ashkenazis, or the Ashkens for short, because this is YouTube and censorship is very real. I will get my channel shut down. If you think I'm kidding, Google or start page Static in the Attic, and you cannot find me. But the banksters of the world today are predominantly of Ashken descent, and Masons seem to be allies to the Ashkens. But they really didn't come onto the world power scene until the late 1700s, the time of Mayer Amschel Rothschild. But let's rewind back to the cataclysms of the 13th century. Guys, that was a full-on reset of society. And who came out on top on that? The Catholic Church. Now, I still got a million questions how it went from the fall of the Roman Empire, and you just look at the maps here, and it's a straight divide of the East and Western Roman empires with basically no information, for about 500-600 years in there. And then the catastrophes of the 14th century decimated society with floods and literally volcanoes, earthquakes, floods, famine, drought, you name it, the plague, all kinds of bad stuff going on, decimates about half of the population. Now, it seems like right after this, the Catholic Church did a really good job of going around the world and scooping up as much of the gold reserves as they could. Now, this actually plays into later on 1935, and cash being no longer redeemable for gold, and getting everything off of the gold standard. That was an attack on the Catholic Church, and later became, the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, who I'll just refer to as the Society. So the Society and the Masons were mortal enemies. Everybody's heard of the Reformation, but this led to the 30 Years' War, which was really just a terror attack on, on both sides of things. But it was thousands and thousands of Protestants and Catholics died during this time. And it was the the Protestant Reformation was much more bloody than most people realize. I didn't realize it till I really got to studying into it. So 18th century France saw the Enlightenment era, which was basically a rebirth of philosophies and the birth of the modern scientific method, and all of these teachings and ideas and everything that were very against the church. And out of this sprang Freemasonry. So big rift between the Protestants, who eventually turned into a sect of Freemasons. And guys, when you get down to it, just remember, these are all power-hungry control freaks. So there are sects within sects that are struggling against each other. So they may be allies one minute and stabbing each other in the back the next minute. But by the time of the French Revolution, ended in 1792, there were around 900 Masonic lodges all through France. Any town that was worth anything had a Masonic lodge, and the rich and powerful people, the judges and everybody, were a part of the Masons. So along comes Louis XVI, who is a putz. He has no backbone whatsoever. Basically, the last person he talks to influences the way that he thinks on policies, and he's just a putz. And he gets married to Marie Antoinette. Everybody knows of her, famous for "Let them eat cake," which she never actually said, but that is an important part of things, because that rumor did get started around, instigators, agent provocateurs. But Marie Antoinette was this debutante, high society, dress party and lavish lifestyle, and the people hated her. And Louis, of course, being a putz, he played along with everything. They're all fat and happy while the people are having a hard time. But Marie Antoinette was also from Austria, which makes her a Habsburg. So this was a political marriage, settling things between the Habsburg Empire. And this was really a big deal in world history, because for hundreds of years, from the 1300s on, France had stood independent of the Holy Roman Empire and the Habsburg Empire being on both sides of them. You had the Spanish Habsburgs to the west, and then the Habsburg Holy Roman Empire proper to the east. France had massive national debt. Basically, ever since the 1300s, off and on, there had been skirmishes between, the French and the English, the Anglo-French Wars. So the country was in a huge amount of debt, and this was right at the beginning of the Dalton Minimum. So hailstorms ruin the harvest to, start things off. So food prices are spiked. People are starving. Everybody's hungry. And then here's fat and happy, Louis and Marie Antoinette. So public sentiment was already against the established order. And just remember that the monarchy and the Catholic Church go hand in hand. They rule by the crown and the crown and the gown, as it were known. So when resources started getting scarce, it didn't take much of a nudge to get public sentiment behind the idea of a revolution. Now keep in mind, these are the Freemasons that have lodges set up in all the different cities. So they, these are the shop owners, the blacksmiths, the people that make the industry of France go round. And they had enough of the crown and their overtaxation, their overspending. Does this sound familiar to any government you guys have heard of today? And they literally just said, well, you guys don't represent us anymore. So they seceded from the monarchy and they formed their own national assembly. Well, Louis gets word of this, and while they're on break, he has his troops go in and lock the door on where they had assembled. It was kind of a nana boo boo. If you guys can't assemble, then you can't be an assembly. Unlike today, that's why we're never going to get anything going, because they control every bit of our communication. If anybody really tries to communicate with other people and get something going, they're going to be on that instantly. But these guys weren't random looters at Kmart. They had their shat together and were looking out for the welfare of the public. And that's something that nobody, like I said, if anything is ever going to happen, it's going to have to be way more organized than anything I've seen out there right now. Anyway, back on point here. The assembly members weren't going to be deterred by no stinking lock, so they went to this nearby indoor tennis court, finished up their meeting and they swore what's known as the tennis court oath, and which was basically to not give up this movement until there was a French constitution established. Now, remember, up in England by now, you already had the Magna Carta signed between the rich landowners in the monarchy. Now, that still wasn't really intended towards the peasant folks. All through the feudal system, there was a class system, and you were born into it. There was, the first, second, and third estate. There's the first estate being the monarchy, second estate being the clergy, third estate being everybody else. Of course, just like now, everybody else makes up 99% of the population. Well, shortly after they swore the tennis court oath, Louis had to send troops to Paris over food riots. Like I said, it was bad times all around. Revolutions seemed to happen, and the resets all happen around these climactic shifts. I'm telling you. I started this channel on 1812. Well, that's just about the middle of the Dalton minimum, and the French Revolution was a big deal. We'll get to their ideals in a little bit, but one of them was that they basically established a constitutional monarchy by then, before going on to Emperor Napoleon. But by the 1812 era, constitutional monarchies were instated in every country around the world. So when Louis' troops showed up in Paris, this really provoked the revolutionaries, and it gained a lot of public support for the cause, because not everybody was on board and wanting to overthrow the established order. You're going to have loyalists in every revolution, just like right now. Not everybody supports BLM, not everybody supports the government, but if the system were collapsing, if things did pop off, there would be people still loyal to the system that we have right now, especially the Wall Street types, and the people that make a lot of money off of this system are obviously gonna stand up for it. But just like now, if you send a bunch of armed troops into a city, it's really gonna piss off the public, and that's what happened back then. The French people got their act together, went to the Hotel des Invalides, and they stole 28,000 muskets that were being stored there. Then they marched over to storm the Bastille. The Bastille, or Bastille, is the French pronunciation, I believe, but it was holding a bunch of gunpowder, for one thing. So these were coordinated attacks. It wasn't random. The people knew where the muskets were being kept. They knew that the gunpowder was over there. And actually, when I think about 300 people initially stormed the courtyard, the French fired on them and killed a lot of the revolutionaries. But then they were overtaken, and a lot of the French soldiers actually deserted their post and joined the revolutionaries. I also heard somewhere that they literally tore down the Bastille piece by piece. I don't know what's up with that. Maybe that's more on the mud flood side of things. But that's really not where I'm going with this video. It's what motivated the public. Who or what motivated the public out there? Now, anytime you talk about any of these quote-unquote secret organizations, it's, of course, conspiracy theory. No, it's just a fact that there were 700 lodges by this time, and that they were the driving force behind the revolution. Now, first I want to ask this question. Is this organization really 5,000 years old, dating all the way back to the Temple of Solomon, and do they have some quasi-spiritual knowledge, Kabbalistic, whatever? According to Louis Blanc, who was a sufficiently pure revolutionary for his words not to be doubted, in his History de la Revolution, he says, to bring under one will and to animate with a single spirit thousands of men in every country of the world, but first of all in Germany and in France, by the attraction of mystery alone. the only power of the association to make these men entirely new beings by means of a slow and gradual education, to render them obedient to the point of madness, even to death itself, to their invisible and unknown chiefs. With such a legion to exercise secretly pressure on the minds of men, to surround sovereigns, to direct governments all unknown by them, and to guide Europe to the point that all superstition, read religion, should be abolished, all monarchies overthrown, all privileges of birth declared unjust, even the right of property done away with, such was the gigantic plan of Illuminism. Now, these guys, remember, they are the arch enemy of the society. Part of the society's oath is to wage relentless war against the Protestants, but they also use some of Loyola's methods, the slow and gradual education to render them obedient to the point of madness, even to death itself, to their invisible and unknown chiefs. Well, Loyola and training, his generals, the Society of Jesus is literally a military order with the Black Pope, who's known as the Black Pope. That is the more common name of the superior general. It's a military order within the Catholic Church that's still, in Vatican City to this day. Black Pope is unofficially the most powerful man in the world. But I guess that's all on which side, you're rooting for, the Bloods or the Crips, because on the flip side of thing, for, the Ashkins, you've got, the Red Shield family. And then, of course, I think Freemasonry is just a branch of them. According to the 1921 book, Freemasonry and Ashkenism, they say that the origins of Masonry is not definite. It has been connected by some writers with older secret societies as far back as the Kabbalists Ashkens of Egypt. It is only known to exist with a certainty in its present form from 1717, which is the date of Anderson's constitutions, upon which all are based all Masonic constitutions. None of the great classical histories of the Revolution mentions the part played in it by Freemasonry. It is indeed incomprehensible. Here's the greatest event of history for 1800 years, an event which has changed the face of the world. A hidden power plays in it an immense part, and this power remains unknown for more than a century.